The second set of digits is the account identifier, so that's your account with that bank. And then the final digit here doesn't even add information. It's really only 15 digits, and the last digit is derived. So there's like a little checksum, right? And that's just to prevent typos and that kind of thing. So if you have the first 15 digits of a credit card number, you could just derive the last one. Expiration date is not just an expiration date, it's also used to, that specific date is used to validate the card when using it. Cardholder name, which is, believe it or not, almost never verified in any sort of way, particularly online. The EMV chip is my poor ASCII representation of an EMV chip. I did my best. But this is, I think the idea of this came out in the 80s, and then they rolled it out in the 90s. But it's this little embedded computer. Believe it or not, a lot of them run Java. This, rather than just static information, there's like a little handshake that happens here. And it's more secure, it's harder to clone, all these cool things. There's also that chip, if you have contactless payment, that same chip is of the brains, and then you have this antenna, and when you tap to pay, it's using the same chip in just a slightly different way. So there's, outside of the scope of this talk, all the cool things you can do with EMV for in-person payments, but you don't have that when you're online. Back of the card, we got the mag stripe, the signature line, which doesn't matter. The CVV, though, this is important for online payments. It's a secret code. Nobody's allowed to store it. It's supposed to authenticate you as the card holder. So all these characteristics of the card, can't use these when you're not there. But the idea of using your card when you're not there is pretty old. So mail order and telephone, we call that MODO. Fax, that's still a thing, believe it or not. And then, the internet, that's what we're talking about today. So no EMV, no mag stripe. How do you make a payment online? So, using your credit card online, you might see something like this. Name, number, expiration date, CVV, full billing address. So what do you think it actually takes to move money? It's actually usually just this, and the rest is risk-based. So just that 16-digit number, 15-digit number really, which are kind of leaked all over the place, that alone will let you move money with a few caveats. So that's what makes this kind of concerning as somebody accepting these. But you get all this information from the issuer. So they'll let you validate the CVV, and it's not pass-fail, it's actually more complicated than that. Address, kind of, they just pretty much validate the numbers. Cardholder name, this is very rare to ever do this, but there are services depending on the card. And then pretty secure, which we'll get into, it's not entirely in your control as a merchant. Continuing with the overview of credit cards. This is kind of a diagram showing the relationship between the cardholder and the merchant, facilitated by the card brands, moving money from the issuing bank to the acquiring bank. Now, information-wise, you're going to go through some processor acquirer, and based on the BIN, they're going to send that request to the appropriate card network, and then that card network is going to send the request to the appropriate issuing bank. And they all have a small role here. This is kind of the end-to-end information flow. So for example, when you provide your card number and CVV, that's going to get passed to the issuing bank who's going to give the response. It's a little overview of credit cards so we can have a productive discussion here. So we'll go over threats. We're going to go over three major threats: data thieves, card testers, and fraudsters. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good one. We're not going to cover ATO, funding fraud, or phishing. This will be a pretty good set of things. So the first one is data thieves. And my daughter provided this illustration here. So they're looking to get card details in two ways. One, through skimming. So like in a physical world, this would be like, this is really popular 10 plus years ago. It was like you swipe your credit card at the gas station, and there's a device in there that's skimming the card details while also letting it go through. This is important because if they're noticing the thing gets pulled and then, you know, the whole operation is off. So this kind of thing exists online as well. And they're also looking for card data at rest. Hopefully you're not providing this, but be surprised how many folks are still logging credit card numbers or thinking that they can, you know, obscure them in some way and jackpot. So why, go ahead.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the problem with having to be encrypted or obfuscated when it's in logs?
Well, yeah, it's because it's like a 15-digit number. So like if you hash it, it's really easy to guess it, right? And so you could encrypt it, right? And like maybe rely on, you know, really strong encryption and having the key set and everything. But yeah, hashing is really not great because it's really easy to guess the number and then you have all the other information. Why are data thieves trying to steal credit card data? Well, they can sell it in online marketplaces to criminals who would then use it for fraud, or they can use it for fraud themselves. High-profile case of stealing card data is this 2018 British Airways hack, where 380,000 cardholder details were compromised, including CVV, right? So this is like high-quality data. And the attackers were able to get these card details through both of the means I mentioned, which is skimming, and they also found 95 days worth of transactions in unencrypted logs, so full PAN, CVV, and an address as well. Detection and mitigation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with PCI. This is, you know, a little tongue-in-cheek, right? In that PCI is this kind of really onerous, hundreds of pages of documentation and what do you call it? Survey to protect cardholder data. But there's so much irrelevant stuff like, oh, make sure you're running antivirus and that you have badge access to card data, that the actual like interesting technical stuff gets kind of buried. But there is some good stuff in there. So broadly, they're giving you guidance on protecting the data at rest and in transit. That includes maintaining a secure network, and then strong access controls and monitoring. So we'll go through a bit of that, and then they can find you criminal complaints. If you're a small shop, you can actually self-assess. They give you a little BuzzFeed quiz, and you just answer yes to everything, and you're good to go. If you're a larger merchant, you actually have somebody assess you, sometimes in person. So here's like a really naively bad example of what you shouldn't do, but this still exists in the world, right? So let's say you have some checkout page on your site, and it's unencrypted. Well, certainly anybody that could monitor the network could take the card details secure. So let's say you're on a public network, anybody along the way could grab this information. So this is like a really, really obvious one that maybe wasn't obvious in like the 90s, that you should encrypt such things. So, oh, look at that. Now it's encrypted and everything's safe, but you still have to worry about bad guys getting into your server, right? Because you're still sending this really, really volatile data to your server. So now you have this little jackpot over here. So a different way, like the modern way, you should probably think about it, is using a tokenization service. And so you'd have some client code running in a browser that would take care of the card details, and they never hit your server, right? So I hit some tokenization endpoint on my form, I get back a token, and then my server just sends this token to the payload. So even if my server is fully compromised, it's just this little token, not storing card. This doesn't get you out of the woods completely. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm that guy. Do you have an example of a tokenization service that we might be familiar with?
Yeah, so like Stripe or Adyen for sure. Like the way their SDKs work. I'm not even sure. I think you can probably send them raw hands. But like they're out of any of these like kind of consumery payment platforms, like Pokemon, so yeah, you're sending the token, but you know, mind the front end. I don't go into too much detail here, but let's say you're doing something like this. So this became popular, right? This is like the appropriate thing to do, but the problem is attackers understand like this is now the way, and they look at compromising the front end. So that, like that British Airways attack, they found a way to compromise the front end, right? And so they intercepted the card details of the front end. There's a e-commerce thing called Magento, which is very popular. And because they got hacked so bad, the front end card attack is called the Mage card attack, named after Magento. So there's some updated guidance on this actually from PCIs in the last year or so. We realize this is a really common attack pattern now. And so things like embedding an iframe that like if the parent code gets compromised, you can't tamper with. Sub-resource integrity, so like if you're including some script, you include some hash so that it can't be compromised. And they also want to monitor changes in files and things like that.
The PCI DSS version 4 requirements are now all completely required as of this month.
Yeah.
Including API security. You have to do something about your APIs.
Yeah. Storing card data, just don't. You don't have a good reason to do this in this day and age. If you need to like store payment methods, just use a vault. There's a bunch of them. I can't think of any reason why in the year 2025. So just don't store it. Don't log it. Don't store it. Store, you know, references to things in a vault. That's it for data thieves, and now we'll get into the more interesting part. Card testers. Another illustration by my daughter. So card testers are use an online merchant as a way to either test out unverified card data that was purchased in bulk, right? Maybe it's old, maybe it's cobbled together from previous breaches, but this is like this boringly commoditized criminal enterprise here. Where you run a bunch of unverified card details against a naive merchant, and then you take the attested data and sell it for more. And there's even a really unsophisticated high-volume attack called bin stuffing. So that's that first 6 to 8 digits on a card. Given that, guess the rest. So high enough volume, you can find valid cards that like guess the CVV, guess the expiration date, guess the zip code. High enough volume, this is a thing that yields results for attackers. So like I said, they can sell the data or they can use it themselves. There's these online marketplaces, from the dark web. But data quality is a major factor in price, so there's this market for clean card data. So again, this is very high volume to pull this off by nature. So hopefully you've monitored just like your baseline metrics here. They should be going a little wonky. There are like slow drip attacks that might be hard to detect, but like generally these are high volume attacks. So you should see some anomalous patterns. Off rates you would expect to go down, right? Because they're testing out a bunch of bad cards. You'd expect off rates to go down, or conversion in general. You might see anomalous traffic sources and patterns, so suddenly you're getting a bunch of attempts from a market you don't operate in. A lot of low value transactions, so to bypass a lot of risk rules, they'll usually find the lowest value transaction they can make and use that. And then the lagging indicator, the unfortunate one is chargebacks, so that's when, let's say I have my card compromised, and then later I see my statement, I go, I didn't make that charge, so I charge it back, or report my card stolen. The money is reversed, and then me as the merchant who accepted that money, I get fined like $15 per transaction. So there's like the low-hanging fruit here is like the basic stuff you do for bot protection and rate limiting. So CAPTCHA and run a CDN, all this stuff. It will absolutely not stop card testing. But what this does is it drives up the cost and lowers the volume. And then you can also use the data provided by the issuer. So like I mentioned, you can validate CVV. You can validate the address, usually it's just the postal code or the number for the home address. You can test the name, but again, that's very rare to actually be able to get that signal. There's 3DS, which isn't like a great mitigation for this per se. Talk about it. So CVV, you don't ever store this. Again, this is like the secret code that authenticates you as the card holder. It's that little number at the back of your card, in front of the card for an Amex. But this isn't actually a pass-fail thing. When you send this through, you're going to get one of these responses where the processor might absorb some of this for you. But it's not pass-fail. It's kind of murky here, and then you have to make a decision what to do with this based on everything else. You can use this as a signal. ABS is a similar thing. So it's pretty common to just use zip code here, like at the gas station, that's a common thing. You just type in your zip code. A lot of online forums, if you're not being shipped something, we'll just ask for your zip code. For the street matching, it's usually, they're just looking at the number for the street anyways. But again, it comes in this kind of murky response. It's not as pass-fail as you think. And then there's this 3D Secure. This is really, really popular and mandated in most of the world, but not here. So this is not entirely up to the merchant. You can request an exemption. You can say, I've run all these checks. Please don't prompt for 3DS because it's a bad experience. And then you can also say, like, this looks kind of suspicious. I want you to do a 3DS check. That's ultimately up to the issuer to do this. And it's kind of this MFA for your credit card. Has anybody experienced this? Like 2 hands out of the whole room? It's very rare, right? Much more popular in Europe. And there's 3DS 2, which is the same thing, it's lower friction. I think 3DS 1 was really, really clunky. 3DS 2 has like lower friction flows, and they even have like an invisible recapture kind of thing where the issuer does a bunch of fanciness on their side. But for the most part, it's kind of this MFA that is really annoying if you get to it, but obviously is a pretty good deterrent for bad actors. For card testers, don't be a cheap oracle, right? They're running a bunch of card details against you to see what's good. Try not to be too helpful with your error messages, like the CV is incorrect. Okay, cool, I just need to change that. And then, so this is why you get kind of not very helpful error messages on a lot of sites when your card details are wrong. It can be kind of frustrating, but this is why. If you're too helpful, you're a cheap oracle for the criminals. There's other step-ups, right? So you could have an annoying 3DS MFA prompt. You could be really heavy-handed and say, oh, we want to do a liveness check and hold up your ID. But so there's trade-offs. That adds friction. So last we'll talk about fraudsters. The final illustration provided by my daughter. So this is where criminals use stolen credit card details to purchase things that they can then resell, like expensive electronics, or directly extract money through self-payment, purchasing gift cards. It's a marketplace they can buy stuff from themselves. So this is a big problem. Billions of dollars card-not-present fraud in the U.S. alone, and really, the U.S. is kind of in the worst spot here because of we don't enforce 3DS and all these other things. So the percentage of fraud is also mostly card not present these days because card present you've got the chip and you've got all these other things, whereas online we're lagging quite a bit. Detection, this is harder, right? So on the card testing attacks, they're really high volume. We've now distilled these high volume things into a set of very, what goes for a lot of money, tested, verified card details. So it's going to get kind of lost in the noise if you have otherwise high volume. Off rates and conversion hits maybe, because again, they're now hitting you with what's verified card details, so they're going to have a pretty good success rate. And then of course, you still have chargebacks to worry about, and it's usually going to be for much higher dollar amounts, right? They've gone through the pain of verifying those card details, they paid good money for it, so they're going to, these chargebacks are going to hit a little hard. So unfortunately in the US, almost all the liability is on the merchant for you to make this decision. Like I mentioned before, you have CVV, ABS, 3DS. These are things you can check against the issuer to make a decision here. If you're an online merchant shipping goods, you can match the address. That's like a reasonable thing to do. Keep in mind, criminals know how this works, and they'll often match the address and then change the shipping address with the FedEx or UPS, for example. There's tools from vendors. You can make your own in-house rules based on what you know about your business. But unfortunately, this comes to you as the merchant, and this isn't like an ethical choice. Do I accept this money or deny this money if it's fraudulent? Because you don't know, and the risk is on you. So if you accept money and it turns out to be fraud, you are fully liable for that. You'll lose the money in chargebacks and fees. And so this is kind of a nuanced thing where the ideal system would block 100% bad traffic and convert 100% of good customers. It's like the mystical laugh that was supposed to solve all our problems. But this doesn't exist. So it comes down to balancing risk and what you know about your business. So there's not really any silver bullets, unfortunately. You just have to pull in different signals and make good decisions. There's a lot of vendors for this. Usually, Stripe and Ant have their own solutions as well. So like Revenue Protect and Radar. So you can use these tools that pull in all these different signals and make good decisions. But unfortunately, again, it's on you as the merchant for the most part. Make the right decision here. I said I wasn't going to talk about phishing, but I thought this was relevant. This came, this is a Krebs article that came out a couple weeks ago. So, if you're taking credit cards online, it's kind of risky because of all the things I mentioned, right? It's just that PAN, which is kind of easy to obtain. Wallet transactions are much lower risk, but they are not without risk because there's this whole article on how folks are getting phished into giving up their card details and then answering a prompt where the criminals will then add the credit card to a wallet. And so now these wallet transactions have your stolen credit card on them, and merchants are seeing this and saying, oh, cool, it's a wallet transaction. This is really low risk. So this is a whole criminal enterprise you can read about here into the slides. That's it. So more secure methods are available, like wallets, but they're imperfect and adoption is very slow. Credit cards and debit cards are still the bulk of online transactions. In the US, at least, risk is almost entirely on the merchant, so it's up to you to make good decisions here. Be smart about protecting cardholder data. Don't store what you don't need. Hopefully, understanding the value you provide to attackers and understanding this thing that's going on helps you make better decisions, protect yourself. And yeah, don't be an easier cheat target. There's like really sophisticated methods here, but like I said, the basic stuff, bot protection, rate limiting is going to save you. That's the end of the content. Thank you.